subways. All right. So another big part of, we did the healthy people. Healthy planet is the other side of your platform. And I was thinking you were a Franciscan, so you're into theology. The wonderful theologian Pogo said, "I have seen the enemy, and it is us," talking about the environment. How does your plan make us not the enemy in relation to the health of the planet?
When I think about the federal responsibility to the challenge that we have with climate change today, I have a multitude of things to think about. The beauty of preserving the place where we live and integrating with nature and the goodness of creation. That all being said, if you're a legislator in our federal government, the question is, what does our federal government have to do in that context? And I believe that what we need to do as a nation is to engage very assertively, even sometimes aggressively, with other nations, 195 other nations in this world, because our climate change or climate crisis is something that affects us all and all species on the planet. And so we have a challenge that has to be met by a unified response, and the United States, being as strong as it is as an economic power, needs to engage with all other human beings, specifically the states, but we need to be leading and participating in moving forward to make changes for the sake of those who will follow us for centuries to come.
So what are the changes that you think need to be made?
Definitely need to get off of fossil fuel. An easy sort of first step is we need a carbon tax, so to put economic incentives to help companies to utilizers of fossil fuels to say, it's economically disadvantageous to me to continue doing that, to go to a green source of energy. That's essential. But to create the international structures to deal with mitigating the effects that are inevitable at this point. So even if we could stop carbon polluting today, there are going to be, for decades and centuries to come, ongoing changes to our environment that are not going to reverse, are not going to just go away. Obvious one is sea level rise. So how many people along the shorelines are going to be displaced? Another one is temperature perturbations in regions of the world that are going to become uninhabitable, like the middle of the Sahara, for example. When you expand those into regions of South Asia, you end up having 2 to 3 billion people that are going to find themselves living in regions of the world that they can no longer live in unless they have energy-consuming air conditioning, which they don't. And so people are going to need to move. And that huge demographic shifting and moving is going to cause such international stress that we need to get ahead of it as much as possible and begin to prepare as a global form of caring for ourselves in governance and making decisions to manage what is inevitably going to come. I heard a political commentator once say that governments tend to be reactive and not proactive. It's much easier to sort of wait for things to get bad and then say, "Oh, we're going to have to do it now." But what I'm calling for is proaction. There's a lot of good evidence about what it was likely down the pike for us, and to begin to prepare for it. When I was practicing medicine, caring for very sick children, I could not allow myself to be reactive. I always had to be in a position of what are the possible outcomes of any choice that I and the parents of that child were making, and how can I get as far as I can into the future of thinking what could happen, and if that happens, what is our plan B, what is our plan C, and to be continuously doing that work of considering these alternative plans. And we need world structures to be doing that in an organized fashion. And that's, I think, the federal response to what we're facing in our planet today.
Okay. So carbon fee would be one thing. I'm thinking Ron Kind has said that he is on board with climate change being a crisis, and I'm part of the Citizens Climate Lobby. So I've gone to DC the last couple of years, canceled this year unfortunately, and lobbied with Ron. And when I was with him last year, it was kind of the first time it really felt like he was on board with climate change really being a significant crisis. But what would you do differently to actively address the crisis that?
We need to stop subsidizing oil producers. I mean, that's an obvious first thing that needs to happen. And we need to be a lot more assertive to the promotion of alternative sources of energy. We need to, this is more of a state level thing, and that is to promote, for example, improved insulation and the decreased use of, energy for transportation. I mean, why don't we have a better rail system in order to decrease the expenditure of energy that we need to make for our current rail system? Or the aviation system. It's such a wasteful means of activity, human activity, that we could consider alternatives to. So all of those ways of, on the one hand, stop wasting energy, stop finding our energy source in a polluting fashion, go to a non-polluting source, and seek other forms of efficiency. I mean, it's a huge system that has many parts. And I'm familiar with Mr. Kind last year starting to use the word, our climate crisis is an existential threat. And so I thought, oh, that was a new word. He hadn't used that before. Do we really know what that means? That our very existence as human beings is in play. Certainly our conception of how we can live our lives is in play. We cannot be continued. It's not an open-ended go and do whatever we want. But we are in a closed system, and we have to be able to make our home within that closed system.
Yeah, and even the U.S. military has been calling climate change a significant threat to our national security.
It's a very interesting thing that you say the military, which has the job of doing what I just said, and that is to consider what are alternative threats down the line. That is specifically their job, and they do that job, and they identify the threats of climate change as very real. At the same time, our Pentagon military is one of the worst energy wasters in our economy. They are very wasteful. And certainly whenever we engage in war, well, that's the ultimate expression of wastefulness.